एक गांव में कोई स्टूडेंट गवर्नमेंट स्कॉलरशिप के लिए फॉर्म भरने की कोशिश कर रहा है और वेबसाइट बार-बार क्रैश हो रही है।
That's super frustrating.
सुपर फ्रस्ट्रेटिंग है ना, लेकिन दूसरी तरफ देखो, इसी टेक्नोलॉजी ने डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफर से, लिसन टू दिस, 3.48 लाख करोड़ बचाए हैं।
Wow.
दैट्स द पावर एंड द पैराडॉक्स ऑफ ई गवर्नेंस इन इंडिया। और आज हम इसी को अनपैक करने वाले हैं इन मैसिव डिटेल।
Exactly. It's a story of incredible potential, matlab facing some very real, very tough challenges. So get ready for a deep, deep study session.
यू बेट। सो चलो लेट्स गेट राइट इनटू इट। पर उससे पहले अगर आपको ऐसे सुपर डिटेल डिस्कशंस पसंद है तो जल्दी से सब्सक्राइब बटन दबा दो। कौन डू इट।
हाँ, and notification bell on कर लो for more updates.
और हाँ, लाइक करना मत भूलना बिकॉज योर सपोर्ट इज एवरीथिंग। चलो शुरू करते हैं। आज के सफर में वी आर गोइंग टू डिकोड 8 इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चंस रिलेटेड टू ई गवर्नेंस।
Here's the roadmap for today's lecture. हम start करेंगे with the technology bias in e-governance projects.
ओके।
फिर we will understand the role of the interactive service model. उसके बाद we will look at the inadequacies in the path of e-governance.
राइट।
Then we will discuss how digital illiteracy hinders socioeconomic development. इसके बाद we'll see the impact of the fourth industrial revolution on e-governance.
इंटरेस्टिंग।
Then identify the factors that affect ICT project implementation. फिर समझेंगे कि e-governance is not just technology, it's about the use value of information. और end में we will analyze the role of the electronic cash transfer system.
Wow, that's a marathon session. Ready? Let's go.
Let's do it.
All right, let's dive into our very first question. Question 2025. E-governance projects have a built-in bias towards technology and back-end integration than user-centric designs. Examine.
Okay.
And the broad micro-theme, technology first versus user-first design.
So इसका simple मतलब क्या है? It means कि जब government apps and websites बनती हैं,
Right.
the focus is more on the technology, the servers and the databases, मतलब the back-end stuff.
Right.
Rather than on the common person जो उसे actually use करेगा. The system is designed for the system itself, not the citizen.
Right.
Basically system focused.
I love that explanation. ये बिल्कुल वैसा है जैसे आपने एक super fast high-tech कार बना दी. Engine masterpiece है, but the dashboard is so complicated कि कोई उसे चला ही नहीं पा रहा.
सही है.
The car is technically perfect, पर user के लिए useless.
शुरुआत में GSTN पोर्टल के साथ भी आई थिंक कुछ ऐसा ही हुआ था. Precisely. Let's break down कि इसका आंसर कैसे स्ट्रक्चर करना है. For the introduction, you'd start by defining e-governance simply. It's about using digital tech to make government services efficient, transparent, and accessible.
Okay, simple definition.
Fair, you directly hit the main point of the question. आप कहेंगे कि इंडिया में the approach has often been technology first, not user first, straight to the point.
Makes sense. What about the main body? वो details कहाँ आएंगी?
The body of your answer should have two clear parts. Part 1 है to provide evidence for the technology bias.
अच्छा, evidence.
First point, back-end integration priority. The income tax e-filing portal, a classic example. Initially, the primary focus was on syncing the database with PAN records, not on making the filing process easy for a non-accountant.
मतलब डेटा मैच हो जाए, यूजर को भले ही दिक्कत हो.
Exactly. Second point, technical specifications over user research. The GSTN portal, for instance. It was built to handle massive transactions, which is a technical feat, no doubt.
Right.
But the initial user interface was so complex that it caused widespread confusion among small business owners. User research basically missing tha.
And the third point?
Third, infrastructure-heavy investments. A large chunk of the budget for digital projects goes into data centers, cloud storage, servers. Very little is allocated to, user experience UX and user interface UI design.
So a technology-first approach in budget too.
Bilkul. Fourth point, system-centric metrics. Success is often measured by server uptime or total transaction volume, not user satisfaction or task completion rate.
System चल रहा है, पर क्या वो लोगों के लिए काम कर रहा है? ये सवाल नहीं पूछा जाता.
That's a brilliant point. The metrics are flawed. And fifth, one-size-fits-all design. Platforms often lack multi-language support or are not optimized for low-end smartphones. Karnataka ka Bhumi project for land records, for example, initially struggled because it didn't consider the needs of illiterate or semi-literate farmers.
That's a fantastic breakdown. So that was part one. What about the second part of the body?
Part 2 is about showing the consequences of this neglect of user-centric design.
Okay, the impact.
First consequence, digital divide ignorance. The Coven portal is a prime example. At this start, it required a smartphone and good internet for registration, which automatically excluded millions in rural or low connectivity areas.
Right, I remember that.
Second, language accessibility issues. The Ayushman Bharat portal has limited support for regional languages. This makes it very difficult for people in many states to access information.
So accessibility is a major issue.
A major issue. Third, limited citizen feedback loops. Early versions of DigiLocker had very poor help sections or user feedback mechanisms. So if your user faced a problem, they were basically stranded.
No way to report a problem easily.
Precisely. Fourth, poor mobile responsiveness. Many important government websites, like the EPFO portal for Provident Fund, they don't work well on mobile phones. और ये तब जब most Indians internet अपने phones पर ही access करते हैं.
That's a huge disconnect.
Huge. And fifth, inadequate support systems. The RTI online portal has minimal help desk features, which is quite ironic for a platform that is designed to promote transparency.
Wow, that is incredibly detailed.
So how do we conclude this answer effectively? For the conclusion, you should end on a forward-looking positive note. State that for e-governance to be truly successful, a balance between technological robustness and user-centered design is essential.
Balance is key.
Yes, and you can give the example of the Estonia model, where continuous citizen feedback is used to iteratively improve digital services. It's about building with the citizen, not just for them.
That's a powerful way to end. Let's get into some cross-questioning. First, how does one structure the introduction to make it immediately impactful?
You start with a simple, crisp definition, and then immediately paraphrase the question's core argument as your thesis statement. जैसे कि, while e-governance aims for efficiency, its implementation in India has often prioritized technological sophistication over the needs of its end users, the citizens. This shows you understood the question perfectly.
Second question. You mentioned the Coven example for the digital divide. How can one example sufficiently prove such a broad point?
It's powerful because it was a universal service. The design choice making a smartphone and internet mandatory for a life-saving vaccine was a single decision that starkly highlighted and even widened the existing digital gap. It's a very, very telling case study.
Got it. For the body, how many examples are enough for each point to score well? Quality over quantity, right?
Quality over quantity, always. One solid, well-explained example per point is enough. For instance, linking the Bhumi project to the one-size-fits-all problem is perfect because it concretely shows how a design that ignores user literacy can fail.
Now, a strategic question. Why is it important to mention the Estonia model in the conclusion? What value does it add?
It adds a solution-oriented dimension. You're not just a critic who points out problems. You're a problem solver who can point to international best practices. It shows a global awareness and a constructive mindset. That's always rewarded.
Another content question. Can you simplify the difference between system-centric metrics and user-centric metrics?
Absolutely. System-centric metrics पूछता है, is the server running? It measures technical performance, like uptime, या speed. User-centric metrics पूछता है, was the user able to book a train ticket easily? It measures human success and satisfaction. एक technical है, दूसरा human.
And a final structural question. What if I forget to write a conclusion in the exam due to lack of time? How bad is that?
It's very bad. The conclusion is your final handshake with the examiner. It summarizes your argument and leaves a lasting impression. Always, always save a minute to write a concluding sentence. A forward-looking statement is key.
Great advice. Now, pause and practice saying this powerful line. E-governance requires balancing technological robustness with user-centered design principles. Go on, rehearse it.
In short, the success of e-governance is not in its fancy technology, but in making that technology simple and accessible for every single citizen.
Moving on to our second question. Let's stay focused. Question 2024. E-governance is not just about the routine application of digital technology in service delivery process. It is as much about multifarious interactions for ensuring transparency and accountability. In this context, evaluate the role of the interactive service model of e-governance.
A great question.
And the broad micro-theme, two-way governance, from monologue to dialogue.
So what is this interactive service model or ISM? It simply means that governance is no longer a one-way street. ये सिर्फ government giving services to citizens G2C नहीं है.
Acha.
It's a two-way conversation जहां citizens can also give feedback, suggestions or complaints back to the government, C2G. It's truly interactive.
That's a great way to put it. It's like online shopping. आप सिर्फ प्रोडक्ट ऑर्डर नहीं करते, आप उसे ट्रैक कर सकते हो, रेटिंग दे सकते हो और अगर प्रॉब्लम हो तो कंप्लेंट भी फाइल कर सकते हो.
सही है.
Portals like mygov.in or CPGRMS are trying to do the same thing for governance.
Exactly. Let's structure the answer. For the introduction, you can start by saying something like, the Digital India Mission has evolved governance from simple computerization to an interactive ecosystem where transparency and accountability are driven by multi-stakeholder engagement. Then you introduce the interactive service model, ISM, as the core of this evolution.
And the main body of the answer, how do we break that down?
The body for this answer should have three parts. First, you define what ISM is. Explain that it's a model of two-way digital interaction. इसके key elements हैं feedback mechanisms, grievance redressal systems, collaborative decision-making, and participatory governance.
Okay, definition first.
Second, you talk about the components of ISM and give success stories. For G2C, government to citizen, you mention services like DigiLocker and the Umang app. For C2G, citizen to government, you mention platforms like CPGRMS for complaints and the use of social media for feedback.
Right. Examples are key.
For success stories, mention mygov.in for policy suggestions, e-Seva centers in Andhra Pradesh, the Khajane project in Karnataka, the Friends project in Kerala, and the Lokwani initiative in Uttar Pradesh.
And the third part.
Third, you do an impact assessment. How has ISM helped? It has enhanced transparency through real-time application tracking on portals like RTI Online, and it has improved accountability measures through public dashboards for monitoring government performance and digital audit trails that make it easier to fix responsibility.
That's a very comprehensive structure. How should we conclude?
For the conclusion, You should first briefly mention the challenges that ISM faces, like the digital divide and cybersecurity risks.
Okay, a balanced view.
Yes. Then you link the success of ISM to India's commitment to achieving Sustainable Development Goal SDG 16, which is about peace, justice, and strong institutions. You can present the models from states like Kerala and Karnataka as potential blueprints for others to follow.
Fantastic. Let's move to cross-questioning. What's the best way to present the success stories without it looking like a boring list?
Great question. Don't just list them, group them thematically. You could group them by state, जैसे Kerala's Friends and Karnataka's Khajane, या फिर group them by function, MyGov for citizen participation, CPGRMS for grievance redressal, and for each, just add a one-line achievement.
You use the term digital audit trail. Can you explain that in a simple way for the exam?
Of course, think of it as a permanent digital footprint for every government action. It records who did what and when. This makes it very easy to trace any error or potential corruption because the trail cannot be easily erased.
एक digital CCTV camera जैसा.
Is it really necessary to mention SDG 16 in the conclusion?
Will it fetch extra marks?
Yes, absolutely. Linking your answer to global goals like the SDGs shows the examiner that you have a broad perspective. It elevates your answer from being just about a government scheme to being about national progress on a global stage. It definitely adds value.
Tell me more about the FRINDS project in Kerala. What made it so successful?
FRIEND stands for Fast, Reliable, Instant, Efficient Network for Disbursement of Services. Its success lay in its simplicity and focus. It was a single-window facility where citizens could pay over 70 different bills at one counter quickly. It solved a major citizen pain point.
A very basic question for clarity. What is the simplest difference between G2C and C2G?
G2C is the government broadcasting or giving a service one way to you. जैसे, you receive your passport. C2G is you talking back to the government. जैसे, you filing a complaint on CPGRMS about a broken road. One is a broadcast, the other is a conversation. Simple.
Last one. In this answer structure, where is the best place to write about the challenges?
The most logical place is right after you have discussed the impact and successes, but just before the conclusion. So you present the positive picture first, and then you add a layer of critical analysis by saying, however, to achieve these benefits fully, we must overcome these hurdles. It shows a balanced perspective.
Perfect. Now, everyone, practice this line with me. The interactive service model shifts governance from a monologue to a dialogue. Say it out loud.
But in short, ISM takes the work of the government out of a closed room and brings it into an open discussion forum.
All right, on to the third question from 2023. Question 2023. E-governance as a critical tool of governance has ushered in effectiveness, transparency, and accountability in governments. What inadequacies hamper the enhancement of these features? Broad, micro theme, e-governance, achievements versus roadblocks.
So the question is quite direct. It acknowledges कि e-governance से फायदे हुए हैं. But it asks, what are the shortcomings, the inadequacies that are stopping these benefits from growing even more?
I have a good analogy for this. Imagine आपने एक superfast express train चला दी, which is e-governance.
Okay.
But the tracks are old and weak, poor infrastructure. The passengers don't know how to get on the train, low digital literacy. And there is no coordination between different stations, lack of interoperability.
That's a perfect analogy.
The train exists, but it can't run at its full potential. यही हो रहा है e-governance के साथ.
बिल्कुल सही. For the introduction, you'd start by acknowledging the premise of the question, define e-governance and briefly mention its successes through flagship initiatives like Digital India, MyGov, and the Umang app. Then, state that despite these achievements, several inadequacies act as significant roadblocks.
And for the body, I assume we split it into two parts, achievements and inadequacies.
Correct. For the body, you start with part 1, achievements in brief. You must give data here. For transparency, mention the RTI online portal with 38.5 lakh applications filed by 2023.
Right, data is important.
For financial accountability, mention DBT with 34 lakh crore transferred. For citizen services, mention DigiLocker, holding over 200 million documents. For grievance redressal, CPGRMS, which addressed over 20 lakh grievances in 2023.
Wow.
For ease of doing business, mention India's rank jumping from 142 to 63. And for electoral reforms, you can mention the C-Vigil app for reporting poll code violations.
That's a power-packed list of achievements. Now for the main part, the inadequacies.
Yes. Part 2. Inadequacies hampering enhancement is the core of the answer. First, the digital divide. The huge gap between rural and urban areas. Quote the NFHS 5 data, rural internet access is only 37%.
Only 37%? That's low.
It is. Second, low digital literacy. Many people can't use portals on their own and depend on intermediaries, which can lead to exploitation. Third, language and accessibility barriers. Most portals are only in English and Hindi.
Which alienates a huge part of our country.
Exactly. Fourth, cybersecurity and data privacy concerns. Incidents like the alleged Aadhaar data leak in 2018 reduce public trust. Fifth, lack of interoperability. Different government departments, portals, and systems don't talk to each other. They work in silos.
Right.
Sixth, resistance to change by bureaucracy. And seventh, poor grievance redressal mechanisms. CPGRMs exist, but quality of resolution is often poor.
And the last one?
And eighth, limited use of big data and AI. Governance is still mostly transactional, not predictive. हम प्रॉब्लम होने के बाद रिएक्ट करते हैं, पहले प्रिडिक्ट नहीं करते.
That's a very exhaustive list. How do we wrap this up in the conclusion?
The conclusion should be optimistic. You can say that while e-governance has immense potential to truly transform governance, we must adopt a holistic approach that bridges these infrastructural, digital, and administrative gaps. The mission must be to empower, not just to computerize.
Excellent. Cross question time. Is it really necessary to write the achievements part? Since the question mainly asks about inadequacies.
Yes, it is crucial. The question itself begins by stating that e-governance has ushered in these features. You must first acknowledge and substantiate that claim with data. It shows you've read the question carefully and creates a balanced answer.
Can you give me a very simple, everyday example of lack of interoperability to use in the answer?
Sure, imagine you apply for a scholarship on a state portal. You have to upload your 10th grade mark sheet, but your mark sheet is already in the central government's DigiLocker. Because the two systems are not interoperable, the state portal cannot automatically fetch it. You have to manually download and upload. Yehi hai inefficiency.
How important is it to remember specific data points, like 34 lakh crore in DBT?
Very important. Specific data and examples are what separate a generic answer from a high-scoring one. They make your arguments credible and show the examiner that you have done your research.
Structurally, what should be the weightage between the achievements and inadequacy sections?
A good rule of thumb is 30% for achievements and 70% for inadequacies. The core of the question is about the hampering factors, so that should be your main focus.
The point about resistance to change by bureaucracy feels a bit subjective. How can I make it sound more objective?
You make it objective by linking it to measurable factors. Don't just say bureaucrats resist change. Say resistance to change, often stemming from a lack of adequate digital training programs and performance incentives for officials. This frames it as a systemic issue.
One last one on this. What exactly is predictive governance again?
It means using data to predict future problems and solve them proactively. जैसे ट्रैफिक डेटा यूज करके पोटेंशियल जैम प्रिडिक्ट करना और ट्रैफिक को रीरूट करना. It's being proactive, not reactive.
Awesome. Let's try saying this together. Bridging infrastructural, digital, and administrative gaps is essential to harness the transformative potential of e-governance. Rehearse.
In short, e-governance is a powerful engine, but it needs good tracks, skilled drivers, and smooth signals to move forward.
All right, now for the fourth question. This one wasn't in the detailed outline, but it was in our roadmap. So let's construct this. The topic is digital illiteracy.
Yes, a very crucial topic. The question could be framed as digital illiteracy is a significant barrier to inclusive socio-economic development in India. Discuss. The broad theme would be the human bottleneck in the digital age.
Okay, I like that theme. So what's the simple meaning here?
Basically, digital illiteracy मतलब सिर्फ कंप्यूटर या फोन यूज करना नहीं आना. It's the inability to find, evaluate, and communicate information through digital platforms. और ये डेवलपमेंट के हर एस्पेक्ट को रोकता है.
Can you give a real life example?
बिल्कुल. इमेजिन अ फार्मर जिसके पास स्मार्टफोन है पर उसे एक ऐप यूज करना नहीं आता जो उसे मंडी के लेटेस्ट प्राइसेस या वेदर फोरकास्ट बता सकती है.
Right.
टेक्नोलॉजी तो है, पर डिजिटल इलिटरेसी के कारण ही इज अनेबल टू लेवरेज इट फॉर अ बेटर इनकम. That's a direct hit on his socio-economic development.
That makes it crystal clear. How would we introduce an answer on this?
For the introduction, you define digital literacy as a 21st century essential skill, just like reading and writing. Then you can state that while India has made strides in digital infrastructure with Digital India, the gap in digital skills is preventing the benefits from reaching the last mile, thereby hindering inclusive growth.
And the body? What are the key areas it impacts?
The body should be structured around different areas of socio-economic development. First, economic exclusion. Digital illiteracy prevents people from accessing online job portals, participating in the gig economy, or using digital payment systems, keeping them trapped in the informal economy.
True.
Second, educational disadvantage. हमने COVID-19 के टाइम देखा, students without digital skills or access couldn't attend online classes, leading to a massive learning gap.
The digital divide in education became very prominent.
Exactly. Third, health and welfare access. Many government schemes, from booking a vaccine slot on CoWIN to accessing health information on Ayushman Bharat, are online. Digital illiteracy means people can't access these critical services on their own.
So they become dependent on others.
Yes, which can lead to exploitation. Fourth, financial inclusion. PM Jan-Dhan Yojana ने बैंक अकाउंट्स तो खोल दिए, but many people, especially in rural areas, don't know how to use mobile banking or UPI. They still rely on physical bank branches.
And finally,
Lack of social and political participation. People who are not digitally literate cannot use platforms like mygov.in to give their feedback on policies, or use social media to raise their voice. They are excluded from the digital public sphere.
that's a very comprehensive breakdown. How do we conclude?
For the conclusion, you should suggest a multi-pronged strategy. Mention government initiatives like the PMGDISHA scheme, but also emphasize the need for community-led digital literacy programs, integrating digital skills into school curricula, and creating user-friendly interfaces in regional languages. The goal should be digital empowerment, not just digital access.
Let's do some cross questions. How can we start the answer with a powerful statistic?
You can start with a fact like, according to a recent NSSO survey, only about 24% of Indian households have an internet connection with a computer, and rural digital literacy stands at a mere 25%. This immediately establishes the scale of the problem.
Good one. How is digital literacy different from just computer literacy?
Computer literacy is just knowing how to operate a computer, like turning it on or opening a file. Digital literacy is a broader concept. It includes critical thinking, knowing which information online is trustworthy, understanding online safety and privacy, and being able to create and share digital content.
What's the PMGDSS scheme you mentioned?
It stands for Pradhan Mantri Gramin Digital Saksharta Abhiyan. It's a government scheme that aims to make over 6 crore people in rural India digitally literate. Mentioning specific schemes shows you're well informed.
In the body, is it better to use many small points or a few detailed ones?
For a 15-marker, it's better to have 4 to 5 well-explained points with examples. Like we discussed, economic, educational, health, financial, and social impact. Depth is more important than breadth.
You mentioned community-led programs. Why is that important?
Because top-down government schemes sometimes don't account for local context. Community-led programs run by local NGOs or self-help groups can be more effective because they understand the local language, culture, and specific needs of the people they are teaching. It's about a bottom-up approach.
Final question. How do you link digital illiteracy to the broader concept of inequality?
Doesn't just reflect existing inequalities of income, gender, geography. It actively deepens them by creating new barriers to opportunity.
Fantastic. Let's practice this line. Digital literacy is the new fault line of inequality, deepening existing divides. Practice it?
In short, providing technology without literacy is like giving someone a library of books but not teaching them how to read.
Moving to the fifth question, another one from our roadmap. The impact of the fourth industrial revolution.
Yes, a potential question could be, the fourth industrial revolution, 4IR, presents both opportunities and challenges for e-governance in India. Analyze. And the broad micro-theme, governance in the age of AI and big data.
Okay, 4IR, this sounds complex. Can you simplify it?
Bilkul, the fourth industrial revolution is basically the fusion of technologies like artificial intelligence, AI, the Internet of Things, IoT, big data, and blockchain. It's blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological worlds.
A real-life example of this in governments?
Think of a smart city. Traffic lights with IoT sensors that automatically adjust based on real-time traffic flow to reduce congestion. That's 4IR in action, making governance more efficient without human intervention.
Cool. So how do we start an answer on this?
For the introduction, you define 4IR and state that it's no longer a futuristic concept, but a present-day reality that is fundamentally reshaping governance. Then, you set the stage by saying you'll analyze both the immense potential, opportunities, and the significant risks, challenges.
A balanced approach. So the body will have two parts, opportunities and challenges.
Exactly.
For part one, opportunities, you discuss how 4IR can transform e-governance.
Like?
First, predictive governance using AI. Governments can use AI to analyze data and predict things like disease outbreaks, potential crop failures, or areas with high crime rates, allowing for proactive interventions.
Moving from reactive to proactive.
Yes. Second, efficient service delivery with IoT.
Yes.
Smart water meters that detect leakages or smart bins in cities that signal when they're full. This improves efficiency and saves resources. Third, evidence-based policy making with big data. Analyzing large data sets can help governments understand citizen needs better and design more effective policies.
And any other opportunities?
Yes. Enhance transparency with blockchain. Blockchain can be used to create secure and tamper-proof land records or to track the supply chain of welfare benefits, reducing corruption. Now for the flip side. Part 2. Challenges.
For part 2 challenges, the first is the risk of a deeper digital divide. 4IR technologies require advanced infrastructure and skills. If not managed well, it could benefit the rich and urban areas, leaving the poor and rural further behind.
A valid concern.
Second, job displacement. AI and automation could replace many routine government jobs, creating unemployment challenges. Third, data privacy and surveillance concerns. The massive data collection required for 4IR raises huge questions about citizen privacy and the potential for a surveillance state.
And the most important challenge.
The ethical dilemma of AI. For example, if an AI is used for criminal profiling, there's a risk it could be biased against certain communities. Who is accountable when an AI makes a mistake? These are complex ethical questions.
A lot to think about. How do we conclude?
The key for India is not to resist it, but to steer it responsibly. We need to invest in skills, create strong data protection laws, and build ethical frameworks to ensure that 4IR leads to inclusive and equitable governance.
Great. Let's do some cross questions. What's a simple way to differentiate between AI, IoT, and big data in the answer?
Think of it like this. IoT devices are the sensors that collect data, like a sensor. Big data is the massive brain that stores all this data. And AI is the intelligence that analyzes the data to make decisions.
That's a great analogy. Is it good to mention specific Indian government initiatives related to 4IR?
Absolutely. Mentioning things like the National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence, NSAI, by Niti Aayog shows that you are aware of current policy developments. It adds a lot of weight to your answer.
How do you address the fear of AI in the answer without sounding too negative?
You frame it as a challenge that needs to be managed, not a reason to stop progress. Use phrases like requires careful regulation or necessitates a robust ethical framework. The tone should be cautiously optimistic.
The idea of blockchain for land records sounds good, but is it practical for India?
It's still in experimental stages, but some states like Andhra Pradesh have run pilot projects. You can mention it as a potential application that promises to solve the long-standing issue of land record fraud. It shows your forward thinking.
Should I focus more on opportunities or challenges?
A balanced approach is best. The question asks you to analyze, which means looking at both sides equally. Maybe dedicate about 50% of the body to opportunities and 50% to challenges.
How do you connect 4IR back to the common citizen? Let's practice saying this. The challenge is to steer the fourth industrial revolution responsibly, ensuring it serves humanity. Rehearse.
In short, 4IR is a powerful new tool for governance. Like any tool, it can be used to build a better future or create bigger problems. The choice is ours.
Excellent. On to question number 6. This one is about implementation.
Yes, the question could be identify and discuss the key factors that influence the successful implementation of ICT projects in government. The broad micro-theme, from plan to reality, the implementation challenge.
So it's not about the technology itself, but about making it work on the ground.
Precisely, many great e-governance ideas fail not because the tech is bad, but because the implementation is flawed.
Give me a simple analogy.
It's like having a brilliant recipe for a cake, the ICT plan, but if your oven is broken, poor infrastructure, you don't have all the ingredients, lack of funds, or the chef doesn't know how to bake, no skilled personnel, the cake will be a disaster.
Great analogy. So what's the introduction?
The introduction would state that the success of e-governance is not guaranteed by technology alone, but hinges on a complex interplay of various factors. You can mention that many ICT projects in India have faced implementation hurdles, and this answer will identify the critical success factors.
And the body? What are these key factors?
In the body, you should list and explain each factor with an example. First, and perhaps most important, is strong political will and leadership. When leaders at the top are committed, projects get the necessary resources and bureaucratic hurdles are cleared. The success of Aadhaar is often attributed to strong political backing.
Makes sense. What's next?
Second, adequate financial and infrastructural resources. Projects need sustained funding, not just a one-time grant. And you need reliable internet connectivity and power supply, especially in rural areas.
The basics have to be right.
Exactly. Third, citizen participation and stakeholder engagement. Projects designed in isolation without consulting the end users, the citizens, are likely to fail. A user-centric design approach, which we discussed earlier, is key.
So involving people from the start.
Yes. Fourth, capacity building and skill development of government employees. You can't run a digital system with an analog-trained workforce. Proper training and changing the mindset of the bureaucracy are crucial.
Resistance to change, as we discussed.
Precisely. Fifth, a robust legal and regulatory framework. You need laws for data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity to build public trust. Without a strong legal framework, people will be hesitant to use digital services.
And the last factor.
And sixth, effective monitoring and evaluation, M&E. You need a system to track the project's progress, measure its impact, and make course corrections along the way. Governance is not a launch and forget activity.
Fantastic. How do we conclude this?
The conclusion should summarize these factors and state that a holistic or ecosystem approach is needed. Success depends on getting the technology, people, processes, and policies to work in sync. You can end by saying that learning from both the successes and failures of past projects is key to improving future implementation.
Let's get into some cross questions. Should I list these factors in a particular order of importance?
Starting with political will is a good idea, as it's often the primary driver. After that, the order is less important than explaining each factor clearly with an example. A logical flow would be will, resources, people, citizens and employees, rules, review.
How do you give an example of a failure without being too critical of the government?
You can frame it constructively. For instance, instead of saying Project X failed, you can say the initial challenges faced by Project X highlight the importance of stakeholder consultation before launch. This analyzes the lesson learned from the failure, which is more mature.
What's the difference between monitoring and evaluation?
Monitoring is the regular, ongoing tracking of a project's activities and progress. Are we on schedule? Are we within budget? Evaluation is a more periodic, in-depth assessment of the project's outcomes and impact. Did the project achieve its goals? What was the real-world effect?
Can I use a case study approach for this answer?
Yes, that would be very effective. You could take a successful project like UPI and analyze how it embodied all these success factors. Strong leadership from RBI and CPI, stakeholder buy-in from banks, user-friendly design.
The point on capacity building seems crucial. How can I elaborate on it?
You can add that it's not just about one-time training. It's about creating a culture of continuous learning, incentivizing digital skills, and even recruiting new talent with specialized tech skills into government service. It's a long-term human resource strategy.
Final question. How do these factors apply to a small-scale project, say at a panchayat level?
The principles are exactly the same, just the scale is different. A panchayat's digital project also needs the sarpanch support, political will, a computer and internet, infrastructure, training for the operator, capacity building, and feedback from villagers, citizen participation. The framework is universal.
Great. Let's practice this line. Successful implementation requires a holistic ecosystem where technology, people, processes, and policies work in sync. Rehearse.
In short, a great e-governance idea is just a blueprint. It takes the right tools, the right team, and a lot of hard work to build the actual building.
Okay, we are on our 7th question. This one sounds a bit academic, but is very important.
It is.
The question might be, e-governance is not merely about providing information through technology, but about enhancing the use value of information. Explain. The broad microtheme, data versus actionable intelligence.
Use value of information, what does that even mean?
It's a simple but profound idea. It means that information or data provided by the government is useless if a citizen cannot easily access it, understand it, and, most importantly, use it to make a decision or improve their life.
Can you give me an example to clarify this? Of course. Imagine a government website that publishes a huge, complex 500-page PDF report on air quality with raw scientific data. That's providing information.
Okay, basically useless for a common person.
Exactly. Now imagine another app that takes the same data but presents it as a simple, color-coded map showing the air quality index, AQI, in your neighborhood with a health advisory. High pollution today. Avoid morning walks. That is enhancing the use value of information.
Got it. Information that leads to action. How do we structure the answer?
For the introduction, you'd define the concept. State that the evolution of e-governance is moving from a passive model of information dissemination, e-governance 1.0, to an active model of citizen empowerment through actionable intelligence, e-governance 2.0.
And for the body?
The body should explain how use value is enhanced. You can break it down into a few key dimensions. First, accessibility. Information should be available in multiple languages on mobile-friendly platforms and accessible to people with disabilities.
So everyone can get it.
Second, comprehensibility. Data needs to be presented in a simple, visual, and easy-to-understand format. Think dashboards, infographics, and simple language instead of technical jargon and complex tables.
Right.
Third, relevance and context. Information should be tailored to the user's needs. A farmer doesn't need the national weather report. She needs a forecast for her specific village. This is about providing contextualized information.
Personalized information.
Yes. And fourth, actionability. The information should empower the citizen to do something. For example, a portal that not only shows that you're eligible for a scheme, but also has a simple Apply Now button right there. It connects information to service delivery.
Can you give some examples of projects that do this well?
Yes, you can mention the government's Open Government Data OGD platform, but then critique it by saying that while it provides data, it often lacks simple visualization tools for citizens. On the positive side, you can mention apps like Umang, which try to bring multiple actionable services onto a single platform.
How do we conclude this?
In the conclusion, you can say that the true measure of e-governance success is not how much data the government publishes, but how that information empowers citizens to make better decisions, demand better services, and hold the government accountable. The focus must shift from data release to citizen value.
Let's do some quick cross questions.
Yeah.
Is this concept related to good governance?
Absolutely. Enhancing the use value of information is a core principle of good governance because it directly promotes transparency, accountability, and citizen participation. An informed citizen is an empowered citizen.
How does the Right to Information Act fit into this?
Making the information you get easy to use. The RTI portal itself could be a case study. It lets you get information, but can its interface be made simpler to enhance its use value?
Where does feedback fit into this model?
Feedback is crucial. To know if information has use value, you have to ask the users. So integrating feedback mechanisms where citizens can rate the usefulness of information or suggest improvements is a key part of this process.
Could this idea be applied to budget documents? They're usually very complex.
That's a perfect example. A government that just uploads the budget PDF has low use value. A government that creates an interactive citizens budget portal with simple charts explaining where money comes from and where it goes, that's high use value.
Is misinformation a challenge to this concept?
A huge challenge. If the government provides clear, simple, and trustworthy information, high use value, it can act as an antidote to the fake news and misinformation that often spreads on social media. It's about becoming the most reliable source.
So this is about building trust?
Ultimately, yes. When citizens find that the information provided by the government is consistently useful and reliable, it builds trust between the state and the citizen.
Excellent. Let's practice saying this. The goal is to transform government data into citizen-centric, actionable intelligence. Rehearse.
In short, don't just give people data. Give them a tool, a map, a guide. Give them something they can use.
All right, our final question for this marathon session. This one is from 2013, but its relevance is timeless. Question 2013. An electronic cash transfer system for welfare schemes is an ambitious project to minimize corruption, eliminate wastage, and facilitate reforms.
A classic.
And the broad microtheme. DBT, the game changer for welfare delivery.
Youth question is all about the direct benefit transfer, or DBT system. It asks you to comment on the claim that it's an ambitious project to achieve three things: minimize corruption, eliminate wastage, and facilitate reforms. The word comment means you need to discuss both the positives and the challenges.
Right. The analogy here is pretty straightforward. Imagine, pehle, the government would send a truck of food rations for your village. Beach mein hi, a lot of it would be lost or stolen.
The infamous leakage.
Exactly. Now with DPT, the government sends the money for that ration directly into your bank account. No middlemen, no leakage. Simple and effective.
Perfect analogy. For the introduction, you should introduce DPT as a paradigm shift in India's welfare delivery system. To show its massive scale, you must quote the data. The number of beneficiaries has grown from 11 crore to a staggering 176 crore by 2023-24. This shows it's a national transformation.
Got it. Start with the scale. How should the body be structured?
The body should be structured precisely around the three keywords in the question. First, minimizing corruption. How does it do this? By the elimination of intermediaries. Paisa directly from government to beneficiary.
No middleman.
It creates a digital trail as every transaction is recorded. And most importantly, it leverages the GEM trinity, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile, which makes it very hard to create fake or ghost beneficiaries.
Okay, that covers corruption. What about the second keyword, wastage?
The second section is eliminating wastage. This is achieved through targeted delivery. Aadhaar authentication ensures the benefit reaches the intended person, eliminating ghost beneficiaries. This has led to massive cost reduction. And here you must quote the killer data point, cumulative savings of 3.48 lakh crore.
That number is powerful.
It is. It also leads to resource optimization as the share of subsidies in government expenditure has fallen from 16% to 9%.
And the third part, facilitating reforms.
Facilitating reforms. DBT has been a catalyst for other positive changes. It has promoted financial inclusion by motivating millions to open bank accounts. It has boosted digital literacy, and it has enabled efficient policy implementation, as seen during the COVID-19 pandemic.
So benefits are clear. How do we conclude a comment type question?
The conclusion must bring in the challenges for a balanced view. You should mention issues like the digital divide, lack of banking infrastructure in remote areas, and problems with biometric authentication failures.
The challenges are important.
Very. Then, you suggest the way forward, strengthening infrastructure, focusing on capacity building, and creating robust grievance redressal mechanisms. You can end by citing the successful implementation of DBT for agriculture subsidies in UP and electricity subsidies in MP as models.
That's a very balanced structure. Time for cross questions. How important is it to explain the JAM trinity in the answer?
It is absolutely essential. The JAM trinity is the backbone of the entire DBT system. You should briefly explain that it's the linking of a Jan Dhan bank account, an Aadhaar number, and a mobile number that creates a foolproof identification and delivery mechanism. Without explaining JAM, your answer is incomplete.
Why is it important to write about challenges when the question doesn't explicitly ask for them? It just says, comment.
The word comment in a question is a prompt for a balanced and critical analysis. If you only write the benefits, your answer will be one-sided. By discussing the challenges, you demonstrate critical thinking and a comprehensive understanding, which fetches higher marks.
That 348 lakh crore figure is very specific. How accurate do I need to be with such data?
As accurate as possible. Quoting official figures adds immense credibility. If you can't recall the exact number under pressure, you could write over 3.4 lakh crore, but the exact figure is always better.
Which other state examples can I use in this answer?
The source material mentions Uttar Pradesh for agriculture subsidies and Madhya Pradesh for electricity subsidies. It's always best to use examples that are well documented and widely known for their success.
Can you explain how financial inclusion is a direct result of DBT? It feels like an indirect benefit.
It's a direct result because of the design. To receive the benefit, you must have a bank account. This single condition acted as a massive push factor, compelling millions of unbanked individuals to enter the formal banking system for the first time.
For the conclusion, how do I frame the way forward effectively?
Challenge. The way forward is investing in digital infrastructure. Are there authentication issues? The solution is to improve grievance redressal. It shows a logical problem-solving approach.
Okay, let's practice this one. Say it loud. The JAM trinity, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile, creates a robust verification system to prevent fraudulent claims. Practice it.
In short, DBT is the UPI moment for the welfare delivery system. It's direct, fast, and transparent.
Phew. What a ride, dost. We have covered so much ground. हमने e-governance की पूरी कहानी समझी, from its technological biases to its revolutionary potential. बहुत कुछ सीखा ना?
Bilkul. And if you look closely, a core theme connects all these discussions.
You're right. आज का broad micro theme था, from building tech to empowering people.
Exactly. Let's recap what we've learned. First, we understood that successful e-governance must be user-centric, not just tech-centric. It's about the person, not the portal.
Right.
Then we saw how interactive service models, ISM, are turning governance into a two-way dialogue, which increases transparency and accountability.
The shift from monologue to dialogue.
We also identified the biggest enemies of e-governance, the digital divide, low literacy, and cybersecurity threats. These are the battles we need to win. We then learned that the fourth industrial revolution is making e-governance non-negotiable. It's becoming the core operating system of the government.
It's the future, now.
And finally, we saw the incredible power of schemes like DBT, which can cut through layers of corruption and deliver welfare directly to the people who need it most.
That's a perfect summary. Now, एक सवाल आपके लिए. सोच के देखो. As artificial intelligence becomes more powerful, What is that one government service you think AI could completely transform to make it dramatically more fair, fast, and accessible for every citizen? Maybe it's pension distribution for the elderly, or maybe it's traffic management. सोचो।
That's a fascinating question to ponder.
और अगर इस सुपर डिटेल डिस्कशन में मजा आया एंड यू फील मोर प्रिपेयर्ड तो आप जानते हैं क्या करना है। फटाफट सब्सक्राइब करो, हिट दैट लाइक बटन अंटिल इट टर्न्स ब्लू एंड शेयर दिस विद ऑल योर फ्रेंड्स हु आर ऑन अ लर्निंग जर्नी। और हाँ, कमेंट्स में जरूर बताना कि एआई कौन सी सर्विस अच्छी कर सकता है। मिलते हैं अगले डीप डाइव में। बाय।